The reason for the renovation was really twofold. One was that we wanted to do some updates and renovations to our conference room where our President's Council meets weekly, and also we have other high-level meetings, so we wanted to do some technology updates and some renovations in there. Second was that the purpose was to get the President's executive assistant in an office that was closer to hers. And to do that, we needed to create an additional office so that we could move staff around in the office. And so when we started thinking about that, it was really the only option was to take in what was used at that time as our student area and our general copy room and office space that we used for storage and all of our equipment. It was at that time that we realized if we created that additional office by putting up walls that we were going to have to replicate the frieze that was on the wall in the big office that had been there since the building was built. And so the question was, how do we do that?
Aramark came to discuss with us options for a unique challenge they had in the president's offices. They needed to recreate this plaster frieze, and their initial thoughts were maybe we could just photograph it and do maybe like a wallpaper type of deal that would clearly be different than the original but meant to mimic it. And we kind of just brainstormed there in the president's offices and came up with the idea of maybe actually casting new plaster pieces. And there are lots of ways we could get there. On the walk back, we kind of talked through different options, but it was really a combined effort between us here in the Experiential Learning Commons and Aramark, who was doing the contracting work for the actual build, and then just discussing with others who had expertise in different areas.
The Experiential Learning Commons in the garden level of Moody Library is a collection of creative spaces and equipment centered around making and digital media and video production. It is also host to a passionate community of teachers and learners and researchers. The kind of work that the Experiential Learning Commons accomplishes can be academic projects, personal interest projects, that kind of serendipitous exploration that libraries have always been good at hosting, and also solving real-world problems.
So the first step, obviously, we needed to recreate the shape in 3D format in the computer. We knew we weren't going to be able to hand carve it, so we needed some sort of mold. So I took lots of measurements of what exists over there in the president's offices. Using calipers, we did a rubbing so that we had an exact copy of it, and then brought that back over here where I 3D modeled it using a modeling process called sub-D modeling. And from there, we 3D printed copies of the pieces. We printed, I think, maybe 6 copies and made them in a way that they could nest so that it would be seamless when we made the larger tile. Then we took those and created a silicone mold, and then used that silicone mold to cast plaster tiles that are about the same length of what's actually there. And then the last step in the process, once we had about 16 plaster tiles, was to age them to look like the 83-year-old tiles that exist now. So we used an antiquing glaze and gold paint to create a gold leaf effect. So once we created the antique tiles, and we had 16 that we were pretty happy with, we wrapped each one of those individually in that foam wrapper to keep them protected, keep them from getting scratched or broken, and then laid all those out in a wooden crate that the contractor then came and picked up and took over to the Pat Neff offices. Throughout the process, we worked really closely with the contractor to make sure that the wall that they added had a space for the tiles to go. And we discussed with them how thick the tiles needed to be and if there would be a ledge that they could sit on. So by the time the tiles made it over to the president's offices, they were ready to be installed. They had a shelf that they would then add the tiles to, so they just unboxed them and glued them in place. When we first started it, I had high hopes that we would at least get close enough that people might not notice right away when they walked in the room, but would really appreciate it when they did notice. I think now, unless you tell someone when they walk in that those are an added piece now in 2022, they would think they're original to the building. I'm very proud of the result.
I'm so proud of our team and the creative work that they did. The end result, side by side, it's almost imperceptible, the difference.
I think it came out great. If you didn't know what part was old and what part was new, I don't think you'd be able to tell the difference.